Hey there, MisWired here, and today I want to talk about ta- um, sharing our stories. Uh, because this month is ADHD Awareness Month, I was kind of thinking about how important it is for us to share our individual stories. ADHD, kind of like just like autism, is varies differently from person to person and experience to experience. Not everyone has the same experience I might have, and just the same way I might not have the same experience as, say, someone who lives in the US, who lives in the UK, or lives in Japan. Heck, even someone who lives in Kenya might not have the same experiences as I do. And I think because of just how varied our stories are, I think being able to just have a place to tell those stories, where being able to share those experiences with others, so not only can others um, relate with you, but also others can, you know, learn from some of the things you've gone through, and maybe impact someone on a better, on a impact someone in a on a to do things that they might not necessarily feel like they'll be able to, or even have someone just be there and feel like they're not going through something by themselves. Uh, because of that, stories. I think the fact that a lot of the narrative surrounding ADHD is that if you're if you behave a certain way, belong to a certain, gender, in this case being male, um, if you show certain symptoms like being hyperactive, constantly forgetful, it it kind of it kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It makes people feel like they're not necessarily they're not ADHD because they don't fit into that quote unquote um, perception, or um, and I think that does more harm than good to the community, because I mean, people are different no matter how you look at it, and it even goes, and it's not just with ADHD. It's, if you look at it from a disability perspective, um, two wheelchair bound, two people who use wheelchairs on a regular basis might not have the same experience, not just of because they might not have the same disability, they might not even be from the same economic circumstances. Um, they might not be the same race. Like, white people and black people have very diverse um, experiences when it comes to disability. And same with being a rich, like, heck, even within the middle class, which is technically where I am, like, economically, I belong to, as my family is technically middle class. My experiences as a middle class might not be the same as, say, someone else's in the middle class with ADHD, with bipolar. And this, I think, when you go on Twitter and you see a lot of these stories, it actually, you know, it not only helps me understand a lot of what I'm going through, it also helps me understand a lot what other people go through, because at the end of the day, um, I'm not the one who defines ADHD. Same as other people on Twitter uh, don't define ADHD. Parents don't define ADHD. I think ADHD is defined by, I think, what majority of the people go through. And at the end of the day, that's where we are at. The fact that we need people to understand that each individual story, just because what you read about ADHD is not necessarily what someone goes through, that does not mean that they don't have ADHD. It's just the same way you might bump into someone who's autistic, but they don't show the autistic symptoms that you quote unquote know about, that does not make them any less autistic, just the same way. And that doesn't make them any less autistic about the in what they go through. Because at the end of the day, it's both ADHD and autism are more complex than just, oh, we are hyperactive, or we're forgetful, or we're very emotional, or to, you know, fill in the blank of whatever you heard about ADHD and autism. And it goes beyond that. It's never been about what we experience. It's always been about how we experience, and that's the major reason why I think stories are very important in telling our story. It is always it's always been about what we go through, and that's like as I've grown my blog, as I started my YouTube channel, I've always realized that nobody can take away what I experience, what I've experienced as someone with as an ADHD and about bipolar, right? Because that's what I experience. It might not be the same as what someone else makes experience, but that doesn't change the fact that it's what I've experienced. And I think the fact that people are very quick to dismiss what others go through on the back of someone else's experiences is kind of lame, for lack of a better word, because you're kind of you're not only telling that person that they're not ADHD enough, but you're also holding this other person's story to a higher level, and you're kind of telling all the other ADHDers around you that you interact with that if you're not like that, then you don't have ADHD, and that does more harm than anything else. It does more harm than what any doctor can says, that what any teacher can say, or even heck, any medication can do. Because we'll go through our lives and be like, oh, I don't show this set of symptoms, so I clearly do not have ADHD. And the only reason you believe you don't have ADHD is because someone showed you someone else with ADHD and told you, oh, you're not like them. And at the end of the day, we need to stop this whole um, comparison, ADHD comparison, um, with outside from outsiders, because I know, like, with ADHDers, we tend to show we we compare ourselves with others, especially like others with ADHD, because that's kind of how we've been brought up. But I feel like sharing experiences is not necessarily about comparing each other. It's about letting others know that they're not alone in what they're going through. They're not the only ones struggling. They're not the only ones who have issues. That's kind of why I feel like sharing our stories is very important, especially being an ADHD community. Um, we shouldn't have there there shouldn't be some level of, oh, this person's story is more important than others, than so and so, because they're rich, they're successful, or they're fill in the blanks. And at the end of the day, um, I think also parents, not ADHD parents, because they understand what this is all about, but neurotypical parents, neurotypical teachers, they need to understand that this whole comparison, this whole, oh, if you're not like, oh, why aren't you able to do this? Why aren't you able to do that? It does more, as much as they might want to say that it's well intentioned, it does more harm, and it makes people keep quiet, because at the end of the day, they feel like their story is not important enough to share. While every story is important to be shared, nobody should have it keep quiet because they believe that their story is not important. Their story is not worth being told. Their story is not worth being listened to. Um, Everyone's story has to be listened to. Everyone's story is worth telling. We can all learn something from each other. And at the end of the day, if we're not listening to each other, then what are we doing? If we're not uplifting each other, what are we doing? Um, so all in all, I think sharing each other's story is super important, and it is, I think, one of the ways that the ADHD community has grown because we're always getting new perspectives, we're always getting new stories um, from different corners of the world, and it not only helps that person sharing their story, it also helps us as people because we're like, oh, I never thought of that. Maybe I should think about that when I'm like figuring things out for myself because hey, it might help me. And at the end of the day, you know, stories just it's not just a one-way street when it comes to stories. It's definitely both ways, and I think that's the biggest perk of telling stories. Um, that's all I have for today. Thanks for listening to my rambling. If you like what you're hearing, feel free to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and see you next time.